And now, let's hear from the people who are designing the mobility solutions of tomorrow. Policy or technology? Which is driving the race to zero-emission mobility?
Of course, there is a symbiosis, but for vehicle technology, I believe that right now policy is driving the race. Setting a date for the phase out of internal combustion engine vehicles creates the urgency to which engineers and technologists are responding.
Well, I would rather say price, considering that from 5 years from now onwards, zero-emission vehicles will become cheaper to buy, cheaper to run, cleaner, healthier, and also, if I may say, cooler. But it is good to raise why mainstream forecasters expect combustion technologies to dominate sales in the next 20 and 30 years. I think this is the right question.
I think technology is ready, policies knows what to do. The problem is industrialization and manufacturing. So we are lacking of skilled people, we are lacking of factories that will produce what is already existing.
Do you see any clear winners amongst the technologies leading us to the path of zero-emission mobility?
Electric vehicles and hydrogen as a fuel hold a lot of promise for shared ownership and shared mobility, but not just yet for sole ownership. In fact, replacing millions of diesel and petrol cars with electric vehicles isn't a feasible solution either. But we do need a multimodal approach like mobility as a service with a much smaller overall vehicle fleet.
I think that the clear winners is really dependent on the infrastructural development, because that's like, you're actually putting in the support for a system to grow. And at the moment, different versions of electric vehicles seem to be looking like the winners, partly because of the ease of use of the technology and the growth of that.
Availability of green vehicles won't be enough to achieve zero-emission transport. Should policymakers focus more on infrastructural developments instead?
As an urban and regional planner, I believe that we can build very attractive cities and enjoy very fulfilling lifestyles around zero carbon modes, such as walking and cycling.
I think that the other aspect of that infrastructure is that sustainable mobility, which is the bigger discussion, is not just about the vehicles. So when we talk about infrastructure, are we also talking about the idea of city forms, about walkable cities, about micromobility, about how accessibility to amenities and services is actually designed? And within that, there's the idea of green vehicles. And whether that's public or private, it's still within the wider context of accessibility within cities.
Sustainable mobility should take into account the entire life cycle of vehicles. Do we pay enough attention to this side of the coin?
Well, for manufacturers, production is always under the sustainability radar because it costs them directly. So once the product is sold, then comes the massive gap in that monitoring. However, recently, some of the EV producers like Tesla and Volkswagen are planning a large-scale energy storage facility for the 6 to 8 million EV batteries that will annually retire by 2030. So nevertheless, we need further interventions like a policy landscape because we are not reaching net zero if life cycle emissions aren't considered serious enough.
Researchers, we are aware of this problem already for decades, or even more than a decade. And we are working to solve this problem, to develop technology which will have a low CO2 footprint and technology that will be sustainable and cheap and also available to community.
Curious, what do you currently see as the biggest challenge to green mobility policymaking and technological development?
Well, as I see the situation, maybe regional collaboration. Renewable sources are depending on regional specifics and are not limited by national borders. In Europe, policymakers shall primarily rely on energy companies and logistics entities where technology companies have a challenge to develop a business model and demonstrate the competitive total cost of ownership.
I will give you an unconventional answer. I believe it is society's belief in the sanctity of the privately owned family car, which can be driven anywhere, anytime, and that the external costs imposed on others and on the planet never need to be paid. They do need to be paid, and we do need to change. And this is the biggest challenge.
The UK has announced phasing out sales internal combustion engine cars and vans by 2030. Can the industry and infrastructure meet this goal?
I have no doubt that the industry will be able to meet this deadline. Manufacturers like Volkswagen and BMW have officially announced their phase out of ICE vehicle lines 2022 onwards. The real question is if we have the infrastructure to support this transition, considering this phase out is just for the manufacturers and not for the car owners.
The hopeful answer is yes, but I think the reality is much more likely to be a compromise through further clarification of the different types of hybrid vehicles and different options that are available. I wouldn't be surprised if there were new vehicle types and classes that were invented to fit into these gaps and loopholes that will exist when the regulation is more detailed.
Some segments might lag behind with the development and deployment to the market, but of course with the increased need there will be increased industrialization, and with that I'm pretty much sure that we can reach this goal by 2030.
By setting these goals, UK government is demonstrating strong leadership towards a clean energy future. We can learn from history that industry can quickly adapt to new circumstances if the business model is clear.